and welcome to the first ever edition of the Bol Dynasty Deep Dive Podcast, a fantasy basketball podcast specifically designed for Dynasty Leagues. I'm Craig Bozic, and you can find me on Twitter at Storytelling41 or via email at storytelling4@gmail.com. For those of you new to Bol, for the last couple of years I've covered basketball prospect side with rookie rankings, college and European scouting reports, as well as being part of the regular Bol Fantasy Basketball podcast with Brent, Son and Viz. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, be sure to take a look and subscribe. In Dynasty Deep Dive, we'll be fully focused on Dynasty Leagues though, rookies and future draft classes. Got a question for the show? Be sure to hit me up on Twitter or email. So without further ado, let's go straight to tip-off. First quarter. Alrighty, and into the first quarter of the podcast we go. Section of the podcast where if you want your questions answered, then please feel free to send them in on Twitter at Storytelling41, or you can send them to me on email at storytelling4@gmail.com. So the first question I've got is from Steve Connell, who is actually a really good buddy of mine and has been instrumental actually in helping getting this podcast on the road. Does a lot of research on the Dynasty Deep Dive articles that I do, so it's an honour to answer his question first. So his question that he sent in was, do you feel Harry Giles is getting punished for his defence? Well, at his best, Harry Giles is a tremendous athlete, really. He can finish around the rim, run the court in transition really, really well, and as a ball distributor and passer, he really is an outstanding talent in that regards. It's fair to say that anyone who invested in him in draft day or own him in Dynasty Leagues is probably a little bit disappointed with the production so far. In 11 minutes per game so far, we've only seen 3.7 points per game, 2.8 rebounds, 0.8 assists, 0.3 steals and 0.3 blocks. And worst of all, it's come on 32% shooting. Now, this for me isn't really an indication of the abilities that Harry Giles has. This really is a tremendous talent, and if you did draft him or you do own him, you do so really on the potential that he has rather than what you're really expecting right out of the gate. Maybe we expected a bit more. I know that I did, but we've got to sort of temper expectations a bit as well, because we've got to remember that this is a guy that pretty much missed 3 years of basketball because he tore his left and right ACLs and in his knees. It's been a slow process sort of getting back to the kind of health that it's just been able to get him back on the basketball court, really. I think that it's, although that he is probably being punished a bit for his defensive abilities, I think that we've also got to remember that the Sacramento Kings are going to be cautious, because this is a guy that I think that they feel is a key component really of their future. So with where they're headed, they've had a tremendous start. That's probably had some impact on his minutes as well. I mean, Nemanja Bjelica has been fantastic. Willie Cauley-Stein has been really good. Marvin Bagley, he's really come on and sort of doing what we expected, which is, thrive in this high up-tempo Kings offence. And although only getting 22, 24 minutes a game at the moment, Bagley's certainly showing why the Kings invested the second overall pick in him. So Harry Giles is definitely a hold for me. One of the criticisms that was always there throughout high school was that he needed to be a bit more engaged mentally on defence. And I think from an IQ standpoint, the offence has always been a bit far ahead of where the defence was from an IQ standpoint. But this is a tremendous athlete, a tremendous talent. If you own him, you've definitely got to hold him. Or even if it was me in a Dynasty League and I can afford to use the roster spot, it's definitely be a guy that I'd be looking to trade for, because the price might not any be lower than what it is now, and we always like the buy low window opportunities, and I definitely feel that it's there for Harry Giles at the moment. So yes, he's probably getting punished for his defence and he's struggling to get on the court at the moment, but we might see a spell in the G League or halfway through the season we might see a change. But at this point, it is frustrating, but don't give up on the talent. This is a fantastic player, fantastic athlete, and yes, there is risk there with the injury history that he does have, but at the same time the reward could be really fantastic, and this could be a top 40 or even better player if it all does break out for him. So the second question that I had this week was from Barry Baker, who lives in Bristol in England. His question was, is this the end for Dragan Bender in the NBA? Probably not the end, but it's definitely been a rough couple of years since he was drafted with the 4th overall pick. He was drafted as a player that had It was more about potential than anything could offer immediately. You know, he was drafted as a very young 18-year-old, 7'1" guy that could help stretch the floor, and he just hasn't really been able to develop enough of the skill sets that he does possess to really be that effective on the NBA court at the moment. Now, I hear the argument that he's still only 20 years old. I think the best sort of way to sum it up was, you know, his coach Igor turned around and said in the preseason that Bender's a guy that can do a lot of things okay, but doesn't really do anything very well. And I think that kind of rings true at the moment, you know. We were really hoping that if you did draft him for a Dynasty League or you own him, that as a 7'1" guy, he'd be able to shoot over defenses. You know, the shot efficiency really hasn't been there. I think he's a 37% career shooter. He definitely isn't a very athletic guy. I mean, in terms of, you know, I can't really remember too many dunks that Dragan Bender's had. You know, he might have only had about 10 in his NBA career, but he's not the kind of guy that is a strong finisher at the rim. He doesn't possess that athleticism. You know, the defense isn't going to keep him on the court. And as I'm sure you know by now, Phoenix Suns just declined his team options, so he will be heading into free agency this summer. I think he will carve out a rotational role in the NBA, and, you know, maybe 4, 5, 6 years down the line, there could be the potential there to be a starter somewhere, but it's going to be opportunity dependent. And I think given the way that his career started and the sort of lack of progression that we've seen, I think that it's going to be a bit of a rocky road, at least in the short term. So he's definitely not a guy that I'd be targeting. If I did own him, it's probably not the best time to trade him just yet. So I'd probably, you know, hold on to him, hope for better. But he's definitely a guy that, you know, I will be looking to move on from eventually when the timing is right. So, yeah, not looking good for the 4th overall pick at the moment from the 2016 draft. Hopefully, you know, new settings, new surroundings might improve his value, but it's kind of difficult to see at this point where that real spike's going to come that some people expected. So the third question that I had was from Mitchell. Is the start from De'Aaron Fox legit? Well, for those of you that follow me, I've always been a massive fan of De'Aaron Fox's abilities, and I think that the biggest jump that we've seen this year in regards to Fox's, you know, statistical production has been as a result of the Sacramento Kings up-tempo offense. I don't just mean this because obviously, you know, more possessions equals more stats. It just genuinely really suits his game so much better. We're talking about a point guard who's probably one of the fastest in the league, if not the fastest, and that up-tempo pace really allows him to attack, really get defenses going backwards. And, you know, he was used to this high up-tempo offense at Kentucky, you know, in a team that he played with Bam Adebayo, Malik Monk, Isaiah Briscoe. So I think this start is legit. You know, the Kings are now 6-3. They've beaten 4 teams in the East. You know, fantastic win over Memphis, good win over the struggling Wizards. You know, they're doing a lot of things well, and I think that it's fair to assume that this pace is here to stay. Dave Yeager turned around and said in the summer that the Kings will be looking to utilise the strengths that they have in pushing the pace of play, and with the guys like Fox and drafting Bagley 2nd overall kind of pushed them in the direction that they had to do this, because it kind of would have been criminal to not play at a fast pace when you have De'Aaron Fox, and drafting Marvin Bagley number 2 overall. If you play at a slow tempo, you really weren't going to get the best out of him in terms of development and production. So I definitely think De'Aaron Fox is legit. I mean, the Kings are 6-3. When Fox is on the court, the Kings are outscoring opponents by 93 points. So it's kind of a testament to how important he is to this team and their success at the moment. And let's not forget that the Kings don't own their first round of this year. That goes to Boston. So it's kind of a season where they kind of want to be pushing to see how good they can be rather than tanking. So, yeah, I'm definitely in on Fox. I think there's still more to come. I think that he's sneaky strong. You know, he has good size, and I think the statistical production is definitely here to stay. Obviously, the efficiency will be up and down. So that's it for the first quarter. Into the second quarter we go. Second quarter. Welcome to the second quarter. This is the section of the show where I'll be looking at rookie performances, having a review of what they've done in the NBA so far, give you detailed information about the skill sets that they kind of possess. And already we can see that we're blessed with yet another draft class that is just absolutely loaded with talent, as pretty much most people expected. It certainly looks like it's on a par with last year's awesome draft class, and so far we've already seen devastating performances from guys that were drafted at the top, whether it be, Trey Young or Marvin Bagley Jr., Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton, Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. Seeing these guys who are of one and done age almost come into the NBA immediately and showcase the talents that they do possess is just remarkable, really, when you consider how young they are. But this week's spotlight will be on one of the more controversial players, very much a Marmite love or hate thing for a lot of people. It is Trae Young. So Trey Young, one and done freshman at Oklahoma, led the NCAA Division I in points and assists, 27.4 points, 8.7 assists, done so on a really poor Oklahoma team, really. He really was the only option there in terms of sort of offensive output, so he did carry the team on his back, which did cost him a lot in terms of his efficiency whilst at Oklahoma. He averaged 5.2 turnovers per game, only shot 42% from the field, and a lot of people kind of went into the season really worrying whether that would translate to the NBA level. Well, for me, I didn't have any concerns, and I still don't really. This is a tremendously skilled player. I had him number 2 in my Dynasty rookie rankings going into the season. That hasn't changed from anything I've seen yet. And actually, I've been really, really impressed with what I've seen so far. I mean, for anyone that drafted him in redraft leagues, you kind of had to expect that the efficiency was going to be poor in terms of the turnovers, in terms of the field goal percentage, because he still really is playing on a really poor team. And if you did invest in him in Dynasty, the future certainly looks bright, because the efficiency numbers are definitely going to improve as, one, he gets more acclimatised to the NBA, but also as the Atlanta Hawks sort of build around Trae Young and add better pieces to the roster, because it is still a roster really outside of Trae Young that really lacks firepower. So what have we seen from Trae Young so far this season? Well, pretty much what we saw in college. Devastating shooter in terms of his range is just fantastic, and he manages to use this range to really enhance his, superior passing abilities that he has, because he is a threat from anywhere inside the opponent's half, and as such warrants defensive attention straight away, which leaves so much space behind defences for him to really, attack on the pick and roll or really utilise the space to pass into. And so far this season, after just really, handful of games really, 8 games he's played so far, we've already seen, similar type numbers to what he was putting up at college, which is quite remarkable really when you consider that he's playing against much more athletic, bigger, stronger players, and at a far superior level. So far through 8 games, we've seen 8.5 points and 7 assists per game. Yes, the turnovers are there. He is so far this season averaging 3.6 turnovers, which does sound bad, but when you put it into context, that is a drop from college, but it's actually still quite impressive, really. You got to remember that the learning curve for these rookies isn't the same. It's not fair to judge every single player just by age, that the learning curve should be the same. With Trae Young, we're talking about a guy who entered the league as a 175-pound, 6'1" and 3/4" point guard. Tremendously undersized. So the physical maturation curve side of things is much, much steeper from the offset for a guy like Trey Young than, say, Luka Doncic, for example, who is, 6'7" and 230, 240 pounds. So we kind of expected to see a lot of bumps in the road early, given the fact that he's on A, such a poor team, and B, he is so undersized. And the future's really, really bright, really. You think, he turns that 177 pounds into 190, 200 pounds of more muscle, better players around him, is going to, increase the efficiency as well. I mean, the Hawks are also playing at the fastest tempo in the league, so even in redraft leagues, the counting stats are going to be there. Obviously going to be hindered somewhat by the efficiency on the outset, but in Dynasty, in terms of an investment, the future is just going to keep getting better and better, really. So far this season, he's only shooting 75% from the free throw line, which is way down on what his college averages is. So there's definitely hope there at the moment to see a drastic improvement in this range. He was an 86% free throw shooter at Oklahoma, and so far 75% is a big drop off from that. So Trey Young entered the season for me as the number 2 overall prospect in terms of Dynasty League rankings, behind Luka Doncic. That for me still hasn't changed. I know there are guys that are very pro Ayton and very pro Doncic, but I definitely think for me Trey Young's definitely in the mix of being deserving in that conversation, along with guys like Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. You just got to remember that these guys all offer something very, very different. I just think that the potential for growth with Trae Young, given the fact that he's way undersized compared to the other guys that went at the top end of the draft, gives so much scope for improvement. Whether it comes year one, I definitely think it will. He will get better and better as the year goes on. But I think it's just so exciting that down the road when we see a stronger, bigger version. This is definitely a guy that could be a special talent that could be averaging 25 points, close to 10 assists a game, very good on the free throw percentage. And, if the turnovers still remain there and the field goal percentage doesn't rise much past 43%, well, there's still plenty in the other counting stats as well in order to, really keep him fantasy relevant, even in redraft leagues. So that's your rookie spotlight this week is Trey Young. 8 games into the season, I like what I've seen so far. We've had a 35-point night with 11 assists against Cleveland. He followed that up a week later, or 9 days later against Cleveland again with a 24-point night. And even last night, in a terribly inefficient game against Sacramento, he turned the ball over 8 times, but he still was able to put up 14 points and 10 assists. So even on those bad nights, the counting stats are there. Atlanta play at such a fast pace. I think Lloyd Pierce is really, really good for Trey Young. I think that Atlanta are committed to him being the star of the future, and given the firepower, the passing ability, the steals are not there at the moment. He's only got 4 on the season, averaging 0.5 a game. But again, given the fact that there's still room for growth, even in this season, just in both the steal numbers and in the free throw percentage, he's definitely a guy that could be putting up sort of top 60 value in redraft leagues and so much more in dynasty rankings as such, and has definitely for me warranted that number 2 selection. So your rookie spotlight of the week, Trey Young. Third quarter. And into the second half we go, and in this portion of the show I want to look at players who I think that you might be able to target at a discount given the start of the season that they had, or maybe some concerns that some of the owners of these players might have after a few games. Obviously as the season goes on there'll be more to go from, but this is an important time of the year to certainly in Dynasty Leagues be targeting players that some owners might have some concerns about just from the starts that they've made. So the first player I want to focus on is the 21-year-old Orlando Magic small forward / power forward, if you like, Jonathan Isaac. Tremendous upside in Jonathan Isaac. For those of you that haven't seen the growth spurt that he had over the summer, this was a guy who's probably gone from 6'10" to closer to 7 foot. And the Orlando Magic have seemed committed to play him in the small forward position. In the Summer League, we saw massive improvements in the jump shot form. He was much more comfortable putting the basketball on the floor. And the potential's really through the roof for this guy, because if the offensive game can catch up with the defensive side of things, this is a guy that could really be, future perennial early round value. Now, there is some injury history there. I mean, he was banged up for a large portion of last season. But this is definitely a guy that, for me personally, I'd be targeting in all leagues, especially given, some of the slow starts that he's had, like during the games. He started the season on like a minutes restriction from Steve Clifford. I think he played 14 and 18 minutes in the first 2 games. But since then, it's stabilised a bit to a more 25 to 30 minute range. I think there was one game where he was in foul trouble and only played 22. But given the fact that so far this season he's only shooting 43% and averaging 7.9 points, 0.7 threes, 6 rebounds and a steal and a block, that's well light of what this player is capable of. And I think that he comes in at the moment as the 147th ranked player. And if you can use that to your advantage to try and target a buy low opportunity, I really couldn't advise it anymore, because this is a guy who, for Dynasty Leagues, the talent really is through the roof for future seasons. The offensive game really is a work in progress. We have seen a huge improvement in the jump shot form, like I said, and his own ability to create off the dribble. We're kind of yet to see it in the NBA as of yet, and I think that this season we might not see some of the offensive jumps that we were kind of hoping for. And I think part of this reason is because Steve Clifford is not the kind of coach, I think, which is going to develop a guy like Jonathan Isaac too well in the short term. The Orlando Magic are really horrific when it comes to ball movement this season, which is to be expected because it wasn't a strength that Clifford had when he was at the Hornets. And I think that guys like Jonathan Isaac and Mo Bamba really are reliant on a good perimeter creator to really be able to enhance their game to the next level. So I think the offensive game in the short term is going to be a bit of a problem, but that could potentially give you that buy low opportunity to go out there, send a feeler out, see what it costs you, because this, he's coming in at 147th at the moment this season. Obviously in a Dynasty League, I'm pretty sure his owners are going to rank him higher than that. But if you can get Jonathan Isaac for a top 80 player, for example, I would be certainly considering that, because the potential is through the roof. He's only averaging a steal and a block so far this season. That could easily double. This is a guy that even with light offensive numbers could literally put up, 10 points, 2 blocks, 2 steals and a 3 a game. And guys like that in fantasy are very, very valuable. The Swiss Army knives that can do a bit of everything. I think the field goal percentage will be an issue, especially in the short term. But given the defensive capabilities, he's definitely a guy that I like to add in pretty much all of my teams, because he provides so much that a lot of other players don't, and the growth potential is through the roof. So one of the guys that I would recommend highly buying on at the moment is Jonathan Isaac. Send a feeler out, see what the other owner wants for him, and if the price is right, I would definitely be looking to pull the trigger. So another guy that I want to talk about that is currently ranked 81st on the player rater is Lonzo Ball. Again, he's another one of these guys, I suppose a bit like Trey Young in the fantasy world, where people are like, oh, I don't want Lonzo Ball. He can't shoot. LeBron's going to kill his value. Well, I don't see any of that at all, to be honest with you. Obviously, the shot form is unique, but he shot over 50% in college. So there is hope, and obviously what he's doing this year with his efficiency increase is giving a lot of hope that actually, he isn't going to kill you in the field goal percentage. Obviously, free throw percentage is always going to be a problem, I think. He wasn't a good free throw percentage free throw shooter in college. That hasn't improved in the NBA so far yet. But he did start the season in a backup role and on a minutes restriction, and since that was lifted and Rondo had his sort of punching fight with Chris Paul, had his suspension, Ball's come into the starting role. He looked really good. He did have a dud the other night, but what we're really seeing is a much more efficient and a better version of Lonzo Ball next to LeBron James. So far this season, his averages are, and let's remember he did have the minutes restrictions early, and he's still finding his feet in a I wouldn't say a new offense, but new personnel around him. He's averaging 10.1 points, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, 1.1 steals and 2 trays a game at the moment. But most impressively, although the counting stats are down, but the efficiency has improved no end. I know it's a small sample size, but playing next to a guy like LeBron, it's very feasible to think that the efficiency is going to continue to improve, or at least sort of maintain at this level. Like I mentioned before, the field goal percentage this season's gone up from 36% to 46%. That's despite hitting more 3-pointers a game at the moment. His turnovers have gone down from 2.6 to 1.4 per game. Again, that's huge in 9-cat leagues. 1.2 turnovers less really does make a difference. I think there's the potential for the assists to rise from 4.5 up to more like the 7 to 8 range. And I think it's just going to take a bit of time, I think, to really see how Lonzo can really thrive in this Lakers team that play with such a high up tempo offense that there are plenty of mouths to feed, even with LeBron there. I know that Javale McGee has had a really good start to the season. I know Lance Stevenson's had his moments, Kyle Kuzma and Josh Hart the same. But there is, given the up tempo and given the efficiency increase, there's enough there for Lonzo to feed. So, given the fact he's currently the 81st ranked player, I'll be certainly putting out the feeders to see if I can get Lonzo Ball at some kind of discount. Maybe the other owner is worried about Rajon Rondo taking his minutes or his dud the other night, or that he can't play with LeBron. But I think that, this is a guy with huge amounts of potential. The free throw percentage is going to be a problem. But he's answering all those questions, those people that said he couldn't shoot, he's going to turn the ball over too much, or he couldn't play with LeBron. So definitely another guy that I'm targeting in pretty much all my Dynasty Leagues is Lonzo Ball at the moment. The final guy I want to talk about in this section is, if you've listened to any Razzball podcasts before or read my articles, it will come as no surprise, but it's Malik Monk. I thought, what better way to start the first ever Dynasty Deep Dive podcast than to speak about one of my favourite players. He's currently ranked the 90th ranked player on the player rater, so if you did draft him and take my advice, you're actually seeing an earlier return than what I expected. I had stressed all along, I think it's going to be a sort of 6 week to 2 month progress before we really see the best out of Malik Monk. Now, a lot of this has come from his ability to, score the basketball and hit 3-pointers in high volume. So far this season, he's averaging 13.1 points and 2.4 threes per game, and that's with being perfect from the line, although be it he hasn't got to the line very much. But the reason why I entered the season so high on him was last year was, let's say, a down year. I don't think that anyone really who looked into it was expecting too much, because again, like we said about Trae Young earlier, this was a tremendously undersized guy, 6'3", very lightweight, and it was clear that he just didn't have the confidence in his body to really attack the lane and really use his athleticism to the best of the abilities. Now with James Borrego in, they're playing at a much higher tempo than what it was under Steve Clifford. The ball movement's much better. The off-ball movement is also much better, and we've actually seen lots of flashes of Malik Monk being able to utilise, these areas which actually make him a much better player, because he is a very good passer of the ball, albeit it doesn't necessarily statistically show at the moment. But obviously in Dynasty, we're looking for those opportunities where maybe you can find something where other owners don't see it. At the moment, I think he might only be averaging 1.8 assists, but if we look beyond, the trade deadline, is Kemba still going to be there? If Kemba's not there, that's going to be huge for Malik Monk's value, because when you see them close out quarters and games, if the ball isn't in Kemba's hands, it's in Malik Monk's. He's splitting time at the moment with Jeremy Lamb. Between the two of them, they're pretty much splitting all the minutes at the shooting guard position. Some nights it could be 24 and 24. Some nights it could be 28 and 21 in one guy or the other guy's favour. And Jeremy Lamb himself is another guy that's out of contract at the end of the season. I don't really think the Hornets view Lamb as a big part of their future. And if they, can see themselves putting themselves in an opportunity to get something for him at the trade deadline, this is another guy that I think that the Hornets could be looking to move. And again, who's going to be the primary beneficiary? It's going to be Malik Monk. So the Hornets like Malik Monk. James Borrego loves the guy as well. We're still getting some of those growing pains that we expected. But like I said at the start of the season, I expected a slow start. And actually, he's performing better than what I expected at this point in the season. So another guy that I'm targeting in Dynasty Leagues is Malik Monk. I think that, if you can sell the fact that Jeremy Lamb's taking the majority of the minutes, or he's only a shooter and he's not putting up counting stats, I'd absolutely be targeting him, because again, we're talking about a guy whose skill level really is, through the roof. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be an elite fantasy option like a first or second rounder, but I definitely think beyond this season there's the potential there to be a perennial top 50 guy, year in, year out, potentially even more. And I think that if moves start to happen, Kemba moves or Jeremy Lamb moves, I think that window to buy is going to close, and it will close very, very quickly. So to finish off the third quarter, three guys there that I'll definitely be targeting. Just send feelers out, see what the owner wants for him. But yeah, Lonzo Ball, Jonathan Isaac, Malik Monk, all definitely guys that I'm targeting. Final quarter. And into the final quarter we go. This is the quarter where each week I'll be looking at the college game and candidates for upcoming draft classes. So if you're the kind of guy that likes to plan ahead, then this is surely a section that will interest you. This week I'm going to focus on one of my favourite players from the class. It's not RJ Barrett, it's not Cameron Reddish, it's not Zion Williamson. In fact, it's no one from Duke. It is Oregon's Bol Bol. A real unique talent, 7'2" centre who's only 235 pounds, which is a bit of an issue at the moment because he definitely needs to develop more strength. But he's definitely such a unique talent in the sense that as a 7'2" centre, he really has an excellent feel for the game. His mobility is really, really strong, especially for a kid of his size. His basketball IQ is very, very high, which I kind of guess you kind of imagine that to be the case because he's had basketball around him all his life, obviously with who his father was. And I just think that this is a guy who has so much potential on both ends of the floor. He's a guy that can put the basketball on the floor. He's a good shooter from both three-point range and from the mid-range. On the defensive end, he blocks plenty of shots, rebounds well, but not just from the blocking point of view. He disrupts the opponents so well on the defensive end. One of the things that's really impressed me from all the video I've seen over the summer is the big strides that he's made in putting the basketball on the floor, creating for himself on the perimeter and really sort of executing that jump shot that he has, which is well above average, especially for a guy of his size. The potential is just really through the roof, really. There's a lot of things that have still got to go well for him. Like I mentioned before, the size is a real issue, and with that, strength is a real issue. And with that lack of strength, some of the flaws in his game at the moment tend to be more like, not setting strong screens for his opponents, being back down quite easily in the post. But obviously with the height, he does create so many issues for the opponents in the post because it does kind of change the way that they have to shoot the ball because he does have a 7'6" wingspan, and I think his standing reach is something like 9'7" as well. So this is definitely a guy who at the moment probably isn't being considered a top 5 prospect. But if things go right, the body develops, the motor improves, and a real commitment that professional basketball is definitely in his future. This is a guy that I think that in a year's time, in 9 months' time, we could be considering a potential candidate for. He's definitely going to be a candidate for the lottery, but he could definitely be a candidate for someone that could be in consideration for a top 5 pick. I mean, in terms of fantasy, he's kind of got all the physical assets that we want. He's got plenty of size. He's going to help out on both ends of the floor. The rebounding, the blocks, the shooting. I mean, it's all there, really. A lot of the things that he sort of tends to lack at the moment. He isn't the quickest. He doesn't have the best footwork or lateral movement. Again, that's something we expect to see improve, especially seeing that he is a mobile guy. Maybe not the most gifted athlete, but his mobility's good. He is able to play well in transition basketball. And I think that given the physical tools that this kid has and the shooting ability, there's definitely the potential that this could be a guy that could be a fantasy force down the road. Again, we're talking about a kid who's really, really young. He will be a freshman next year in Oregon, so there is the potential that he does stay there and not enter the NBA draft in 2019. But one of I wouldn't necessarily say under the radar because most people who follow college basketball, Bol Bol will be definitely on their radar. But At the moment, the perception of where he might go in the draft isn't that of, some of the top candidates there, whether it be, Reddish or Zion Williamson or Sekou Demboye. There are a lot of people that other people are higher on at the moment. And I think the improvements that I've seen over the summer definitely give this kid a chance at the moment to definitely be in the conversation for maybe not top overall pick, but definitely in that top 5 range. And from a fantasy perspective, I think that there's just so many tools that could really help this kid, flourish into a really popular guy next year. And even if he isn't very popular, maybe one of those sleeper kind of guys that can offer you a bit more than what the perception of people around think that he might be able to do. So that's your college profile for this week. Bol Bol. In most rankings, he's at the moment, although obviously very, very premature, he's floating in that top 14 range, but I definitely think there's the potential there for, after a full college season, for him to be a top 5 candidate. Okay, well, that's a wrap for the first ever Dynasty Deep Dive podcast. I'm Craig Bozic. If you've got any questions you'd like answered on the show, then please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at storytelling41 or email me at storytelling4@gmail.com and I'll see what I can do to get them on there. So, ta-da for now.